is sexuality more or less important than our culture assumes? The answer to that question is complicated because there's a paradox at work right now in our culture. And this paradox demands a paradoxical response from the church as well. On the one hand, there are many in our culture that want to say basically that sex is nothing. It's what we would call the idea of casual sex, that sex and our sexuality is really something that we could say is just recreational. It's as long as it's consensual and no one gets hurt, then there's really nothing to it. And you see this with the rise of pornography, the hookup culture, apps on our phone like Tinder and things like that. There's this mindset in society that sex is not a big deal. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there are some people now that basically say that sexuality is necessary for human flourishing, that sexual self-expression is the way that we find fulfillment. It's the way we find happiness, satisfaction in our lives, to the point that sexual identity now has become such a mainstay of our national conversation about what it means to be human, what it means to be free, what it means to flourish as people. And so on one hand, you've got people saying sex is basically nothing. It's not that big of a deal. And on the other hand, you have people who say sex is everything. This is where I find my identity, my hopes and dreams. I'm staking a claim and this is who I am. To this, the church must simultaneously say two things about sexuality. On the one hand, we're going to have to elevate sexuality. On the other hand, we're going to have to demote sexuality. And here's what I mean by that. On the one hand, we have to elevate the significance of the sexual union. One of the reasons that we would say casual sex is a myth is because we believe God has created sexuality so that it would find its proper place, its ultimate significance in the covenant union of a man and a woman. That this man and a woman coming together in covenant union, this one flesh union, as the scriptures teach, is oriented toward the bringing about of new life and is also a picture of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So on the one hand, the church has to say sex is much more serious than the culture says, that there is no such thing as casual sex. In fact, the fact that the fact that our culture seems to be going so quickly in this seems to be moving so quickly in the direction of casual sex is itself a symbol, is itself a sign that our culture is seeking for the transcendence that people simply know must be there and are not finding, because they recognize there is something transcendent, there is something significant about the sexual union. So on the one hand, the church will have to say that sex is more important than the culture thinks, and even show that by the way that we fight against things that may seem normal to the culture, things like pornography, or the way we may discipline a church member who commits adultery and whatnot. On the other hand, when it comes to saying that sex is everything, the church will have to demote the significance of sexuality, to say that no, human dignity teaches that we are more than our sexual urges, that we cannot be reduced to our sexual identity, that sexual attraction must not and cannot define us completely as human beings, that while this is an important aspect of our human personality and our human life, this is not the only aspect, which means we'll have to say that sex is not as important as the culture says it is, but also show that with some of the examples we lift up, people throughout biblical history, throughout church history, even people today who have shown us that human flourishing does not depend on sexual expression, that God uses all kinds of people in all kinds of ways for the glory of his name. So in this society that we live in, we have the paradoxical task of responding to a culture who on the one hand says sex is nothing, on the other hand says sex is everything, by responding to one by elevating sexuality, and on the other by demoting it to put it in its proper place.